It began with a sound that didn't belong. A dull thump, too heavy to be a bird, too rhythmic to be wind. I paused mid-sip, coffee suspended between my lips and the desk. Another creak followed, one I knew all too well. The groan of weight shifting on beams, never meant to hold more than a man and his thoughts. Someone was on my roof. I bolted to the back staircase, taking the narrow steps two at a time. My rooftop deck hadn't seen company in months. The HOA had fined me $300 last spring for hosting a barbecue up there, citing excessive elevation of social gatherings. After that, I'd kept to myself. No parties. No plants. Just a chair, a book, and the occasional star. Now it sounded like a crowd. When I pushed open the access door, my jaw refused to close. Rows of folding chairs, draped in white satin bows, lined either side of a red carpet that ran the length of my deck. A flower arch had been zip-tied to the railing, struggling against the spring breeze. Guests in pastel suits and chiffon dresses laughed, mingled, posed for selfies against the skyline like they were at a rooftop bar in Manhattan, not a private residence in the sleepy lakeside haven community. And in the center of it all, standing tall with a clipboard and a walkie-talkie, was Karen Mueller. She didn't see me at first, too busy instructing a teenager on how to tape down the runner so it wouldn't flap during vows. "Karen," I said, sharp as a nail. "What the hell is going on?" She turned slowly, all pink taffeta and pearls, smiling like I was the guest here. "Oh, Richard, don't worry, we'll be done before sunset." "That's not what I asked." She blinked, as if confused by my confusion. "It's my niece's wedding. We needed a scenic spot for the ceremony, and your roof had the best view. You weren't using it." "I live here." Karen tilted her head. "And you weren't home when we set up. Marcus let us in." "Marcus?" I echoed, stunned. "The maintenance guy?" "HOA authority," she said, waving her hand like she was brushing away a cobweb. Section 3.4 of the Lakeside Haven Charter permits access to shared communal spaces in event of significant community functions. This isn't communal. It's my roof. My property. Karen stepped closer, her voice lowering into the condescending tone she reserved for dissenters. "Technically, elevated outdoor structures that exceed 15 feet are subject to community usage review under Clause 5.9b. I invoked it under emergency exception." "What emergency?" I hissed. The florist bailed on the other venue. I looked around. Not a single neighbor had warned me. Not one had questioned the ethics of throwing a wedding on someone else's home. Maybe they were too intimidated. Karen's hold on the HOA was infamous, tyrannical, unshakable. She once fined a disabled veteran for repainting his porch the wrong shade of beige. She'd banned Halloween decorations because they promoted chaos. And now she'd turn my home into her personal event venue. "I didn't authorize this," I said, barely managing to keep my voice from breaking. "Well," Karen said brightly, "it's too late to change locations. The guests are arriving. The caterers will be here any minute. Oh, and the champagne's in your downstairs fridge. Hope that's okay." She handed me a flute, filled to the brim. "Smile, Richard. Be a team player." The words echoed louder than the rooftop laughter. Something snapped behind my eyes. Years of silent compliance, of mowing lawns to regulation height, of painting over murals, of watching neighbors move away just to escape her iron grip. I set the glass down on the ledge. Then I turned and walked away, not saying another word. But as I descended the stairs, I wasn't thinking about police reports or angry emails. I was thinking about my roots, where I came from, and how in my culture, when someone disrespects your house, you don't get mad. You celebrate. I didn't sleep that night. Karen's voice, fake sweet, smug, looped in my head like a curse. "Smile, Richard. Be a team player." I stared at the ceiling and imagined it cracking under the weight of her entitlement. The gall it took to invade someone's home, declare it communal, and smile while doing it was pathological. And what stung worse? No one had stood up for me. Not Marcus, the HOA hired handyman who gave them the key. Not my next-door neighbor Pam, who I'd helped move her couch 3 months ago. Not even Mr. Landon, the old-school jazz lover on the corner, who once told me Karen was a virus with lipstick. All silent. Karen's power wasn't just fear, it was apathy. No one wanted to be the target of her next code violation or yard inspection. She ruled not with charisma, but with paperwork and passive threats. The next morning, I shaved, put on my best blazer, and walked into the HOA office with a folder thick with documentation. Photos of the rooftop setup, timestamps, security cam footage of her guests entering my home. I even printed the bylaws she had twisted like taffy to justify the trespass. Karen sat behind the desk, scrolling through her phone unbothered. I cleared my throat. "We need to talk." She looked up, then leaned back with a smug tilt of her head. "If it's about yesterday, the board's already been notified. We've documented the event as a temporary communal usage under Clause 5.9b and subsection 4.7 emergency authorization. It was illegal. You broke into my house." She smiled like I'd told her a joke. "No one broke anything, Richard. The HOA has keys to all community-registered access points. You signed that waiver when you moved in." "I never signed anything that says you can throw a party on my roof. Perhaps you should read the fine print." She slid a file toward me, the pages dog-eared and highlighted like it had been waiting for just this occasion. I glanced at the first page. The clause was real, vague, but dangerously real. The kind of wording that gave HOA leaders unchecked authority with enough rhetorical gymnastics. "I'm taking this to the board," I said flatly. "Of course," she said, as if I were a child threatening to tell on her to a babysitter. "Our meeting is tomorrow. But do be prepared for a vote. And do remember who's on the board." I didn't have to. The board was Karen's loyal entourage, retired busybodies who owed her favors or fear her wrath. Complaints were routinely dismissed, appeals ignored. Karen didn't need truth. She had structure. Layers of vague language and exploited loopholes woven together into an HOA empire. Still, I showed up. At the meeting, I stood and presented every shred of evidence. Some board members shifted uncomfortably. Others avoided my eyes. But when Karen stood to respond, her words oozed diplomacy, like oil on water. Richard's frustration is understandable. But we must remember, the HOA is a community. Sometimes that requires sacrifice for the greater good. The rooftop event brought joy to many residents, and frankly, his space had gone unused for years. "Because you find me every time I used it," I snapped. A few people looked down. A few actually nodded. Karen, sensing the temperature shift, pivoted effortlessly. "If Richard feels his property rights were violated, he's welcome to file a formal grievance. But the board must consider precedent. Do we punish community spirit? Do we discourage neighbors from helping each other in times of need?" I laughed loudly. This wasn't helping. This was commandeering. And everyone here knows it. Karen motioned for a vote. One by one, the board sided with her. 7-1. My motion was denied. My warning ignored. Outside, I stood in the sun, feeling a mix of rage and impotence. She'd done it again, steamrolled another neighbor, and gotten away clean. But as I stared across the quiet cul-de-sac, I thought of my mother's voice from long ago. Back in Ghana, when a boy stole my kite and laughed as he ran off, I'd come home crying. My mother didn't yell. She didn't march out to confront the thief. She threw me a better celebration, a louder, brighter, joyful affair in the village square. The boy came to watch, stunned. And in the end, he gave the kite back without a word. That memory returned with clarity so sharp, I could hear the drums. Karen had staged a wedding on my roof. Fine. I'd stage a revolution. And I'd do it with rhythm. It took 3 days to set everything in motion. I called in a favor from an old friend, Kofi, who ran the local African Cultural Center. We had grown up together, his family steeped in tradition, mine in resistance. We had played together in the streets of Accra, beating on anything that could mimic the thunderous rhythm of drums. Now, he had access to the best drummers in town, men and women who could play from sunup to sundown, filling the air with energy until it felt like the very earth itself was shaking. He didn't ask why I needed them. He just agreed. The night before the big day, I stood on my roof again, looking out over the quiet suburban neighborhood. The sun had just dipped below the horizon, and I could see the lights from Karen's event still flickering faintly on my deck. I could practically hear her ordering her guests around in that self-assured tone, as if it were all hers to command. Tomorrow, I would take it back. I wasn't just going to throw a party. I wasn't just going to annoy her with noise. No, this would be a statement. A celebration of everything she couldn't control. And I would do it in the loudest, most joyous way possible. Her wedding day would drown in the rhythm of drums. The next morning, I woke to the sound of Karen's team assembling. The caterers were setting up on my lawn. The floral decorators were restringing the garlands on the roof. She had everything running like clockwork, completely unaware of what was coming. I watched them for a few minutes, their presence already grating. Then I turned, heading inside to prepare for my guests. By noon, Kofi and his team had arrived, dressed in bright traditional garb, each drummer carrying instruments decorated with vibrant cloth and beads. They set up at the far end of my lawn, just out of sight of Karen's carefully planned event. I had the equipment they'd need, speakers, amplifiers, microphones, all ready to go. I felt a thrill in my chest, a tingling anticipation that grew the closer we got to the afternoon. At precisely 3 p.m., I stood at the edge of my roof, overlooking the scene below. Karen's wedding guests were milling about, glasses in hand, exchanging pleasantries. The bride, a young woman in a white dress, stood next to a minister, nervously glancing at her phone. The ceremony was just about to begin. I nodded to Kofi. The drums began. The first beat hit the air like a wave crashing against the shore, deep and commanding. I had forgotten how powerful they could be. The rhythm was not just sound, it was a force, a pulse, a heartbeat. The kind of rhythm that grabs hold of your soul and makes you move, whether you want to or not. The first beat echoed across the neighborhood, and Karen's guests froze. I could hear their confused murmurs below, but I didn't care. The second beat came, louder, faster. And then the third, a wild, unrelenting sound that filled every inch of the air around us. The bride's face twisted in confusion. Her guests, now turning in every direction, scanned the rooftop, searching for the source of the chaos. They couldn't see Kofi's crew, only the sound. It poured down on them, enveloping them, until the wedding was no more than a faint hum against the backdrop of the drumming. Karen's face appeared, red as a tomato, her eyes scanning the roof in panic. I could see her mouth moving, probably demanding to know what was happening, why no one had stopped it. But the drums only grew louder. The drummers were in sync, each hit a declaration, each stroke a reminder of the power that could be harnessed with sound alone. I leaned over the edge of my roof, enjoying the look on Karen's face as her plans began to unravel. The wedding was no longer the center of attention. It was a footnote, buried beneath the relentless beats of the drum line. Then, as the rhythm reached its crescendo, Kofi signaled his team to switch it up. Faster, wilder, more chaotic. The tempo sped up, and suddenly, the whole street was vibrating. The guests were no longer just confused. They were disoriented, caught in the sheer unpredictability of it all. Karen tried to step forward, shouting over the noise. "Stop. This is my wedding. Call the police." But the police were not the solution here. The noise was her problem, her defeat. I had taken her authority and turned it into a celebration of freedom. Her wedding was now nothing but an afterthought to the very community she had trampled on. I saw her make a motion as if to storm up to my roof, but she paused when she noticed the crowd of her own guests looking around, unsure whether to stay or leave. The excitement had turned to discomfort. The opulence she had so carefully orchestrated was now drowned by the thunderous rhythm of rebellion. And then, just as quickly as it had started, the drumming stopped. The sudden silence was deafening. Karen stood frozen, her hands shaking. The bride, uncertain, glanced at her guests, who seemed ready to follow whatever cue came next. And just like that, the atmosphere shifted from tension to pure chaos. But I had made my point. The HOA had overstepped, and now I had shown everyone exactly who was in control of this space. The silence lingered, thick with tension. Karen stood motionless, her face flushed with disbelief as she surveyed the guests who, after the drumming stopped, were left with nothing but awkward murmurs and shifting feet. It wasn't just the unexpected sound that had thrown them, it was the raw, unapologetic energy that filled the air, the rhythm that refused to be ignored. The chaos had undone her. She blinked, then pointed at me, her lips trembling with fury. You've ruined everything. I didn't reply immediately. I could see the facade crumbling. Her carefully curated wedding, her control over this neighborhood, all of it slipping through her fingers. She couldn't grasp it, couldn't make it right. She had no power in this moment. The guests were confused, but some of them, including the bride, were starting to laugh, to smile. The joy that had been stifled under the weight of Karen's calculated planning was now breaking free, born from the sudden liberation the drums had brought. It was spontaneous, wild, unchoreographed. And as for Karen, her fury was palpable, but it was more than that. It was fear. Fear of losing the hold she had on everyone, of realizing just how little authority she truly had in the face of a community united against her. She stormed toward me, her voice shrill. "You think this is funny? You think this is some kind of joke? I'll have you fined for disturbing the peace, for obstructing a private event. Do you know how many rules you've broken?" Rules. I raised an eyebrow. "You don't get to use that word anymore, Karen. You've been bending them for years." But this was different. Her eyes widened in disbelief as she saw the crowd's reaction to my words, the way they were looking at her, their discomfort now tinged with realization. The invisible walls she'd constructed around herself were crumbling faster than she could rebuild them. For the first time in years, she was losing control. I took a step closer, my voice steady, clear. "You've abused the system. Used it to bully, to intimidate, to impose your will on people who just want to live their lives. But no one's afraid of you anymore." Her face twisted, a cocktail of anger, disbelief, and something darker, resentment. The reality of the moment was sinking in, and she wasn't prepared for it. "You can't do this," she screamed. "This is my neighborhood. I make the rules." "No," I said calmly. "You don't. You never did. The rules were always meant to be for the community, not just for you to wield as a weapon." The guests who had been standing, frozen, now started to move, some drifting back to their cars, others whispering among themselves. The vibe was changing, slowly but surely. It wasn't just a wedding that had been interrupted. It was an illusion of control that was being shattered in real time. Karen's shoulders slumped as she realized she was losing this battle, and with it, her precious reputation. The power she'd spent years building was no longer in her hands. I took another step, a slow, deliberate one. "You've hurt people for far too long, Karen. It's time for you to see what happens when you push people too far. You're not untouchable." She recoiled, a sharp breath escaping her lips, her voice cracking. "You don't understand. This is my event. I can't let you get away with this." "Oh, I understand just fine," I replied. "You don't get to steal from people's lives anymore. You don't get to walk all over them and then pretend everything's fine." The last of the wedding guests were leaving now, the mood irreparably changed. The laughter from the earlier moments had disappeared, replaced by quiet murmurs and the sound of footsteps retreating from Karen's domain. And the drums, though silent now, still hung in the air, like a promise that would echo long after the final beat. Karen's eyes narrowed, but I could see the weariness beneath her gaze. She knew this was over. She could threaten fines, she could call in her allies, but she had lost this war. The community was waking up. I turned to leave the roof, but I paused one last time. "You were wrong about one thing, Karen." "What's that?" Her voice was hoarse, a last-ditch effort at defiance. "This isn't about you. It never was. It's about the people you tried to control. And they're not going to forget what you did." I descended the stairs, leaving Karen standing there in the remnants of her wedding chaos, the distant echoes of drums still ringing in my ears. The next morning, I knew things would be different. People would talk. Karen would be exposed for the tyrant she had always been. And as for me? Well, I wasn't just the guy who got his roof turned into a wedding venue. I was the guy who'd finally taken it back.